on colonization, ethnic conflict, and climate change in Nigeria. To begin my presentation, I'm going to give you guys the basic facts about Nigeria. The languages mostly spoken in Nigeria are English, which is the predominant language due to colonization. Then there's Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, English Creole, and Fula. The ethnic groups that mostly make up Nigeria are the Hausa Fulani, Yoruba, and the Igbo. And these different ethnic groups make up different regions of the country as well as different religions, and I'll get more into that later on in the presentation. Nigeria is located in West Africa, so their most valued resources are oil, gas, and coal. And of course, during the colonial times, these resources piqued the interest of the British, so they began infiltrating the country in the 1800s. In 1884, there was a Berlin Conference that split Nigeria between European powers into 3 protectorates. Then 30 years later, the Southern Protectorate of Nigeria and the Northern Protectorate of Nigeria joined together to form the colony of Nigeria. Under the colonization, the Britons exploited mostly all of Nigeria's natural resources. They exploited their coal, their oil. They also exploited their labor for the benefit of their own selves and the benefit of their own countries, which were mostly Western European countries. And they also took complete control over their governance and their decision-making. This also included their assimilation to their religion. British missionaries began coming into Nigeria trying to convert them to Christianity. Now, before these missionaries came, most of the Nigerians belonged to the Islamic faith or the sun worship faith. So, of course, there was some resistance when these Christian missionaries began coming. And most of the resistance was coming from the north. And this can still be seen in the regions today. Now, because there was some resistance, the British began using violence and divide and rule tactics to really push Nigerians to convert to Christianity. Now, these tactics worked on the southern Nigerians as they started begin to accept Christianity. And as a result, they were able to enjoy educational development, economic growth, urbanization, and the rise of a middle class. Whereas in the northern hemisphere of Nigeria, they still were experiencing extreme poverty and lack of education, but they did have an abundance of crop production growth. Now, this wasn't the only ethnic and religious conflict that was beginning to rise between the Nigerians and the British. Many Nigerian ex-servicemen and civilians began protesting because there was no representation for Nigerians in their government. So as a result, the British established or created a constitution that established a federalist system. And this federalist system was for Nigeria, the Southern Cameroons, and the Federal Territory of Lagos. Now, this constitution was steps to a more progressive Nigeria. So in 1960, they were finally granted their independence. So, of course, because Nigeria was granted their independence, that didn't mean that that erased the religious and ethnic conflict created by the British. If anything, that meant that it emphasized the conflict, the ethnic and religious conflict left behind by the British. And this can still be seen in how Nigeria is dealing with their severe climate change crisis. Today, Nigeria is going through an extreme climate crisis. They've been going through climate crisis since 2011, but it just gets increasingly worse. They are experiencing extreme flooding, droughts, land degradation, soil erosion, lack of resources, threats to their water resources. And this is really just putting a burden on all of the citizens and the land in general in Nigeria. And responses to climate change are important because it affects the nature and characteristics of their resources, especially their freshwater resources, which many of the Nigerians depend on. Unpredictable rainfall, heat, stress, and drought can also adversely affect food production and result in food shortages, malnutrition, the spread of diseases, and air pollution. Lastly, problems with crop yields and productivity can have an adverse effect on Nigeria's GDP. So all of these show the implications of climate change in Nigeria and why responses are important. Now, even though Nigeria as a whole is experiencing climate change, they are experiencing it differently by the borders. For example, in the northern region is where they are experiencing the most droughts, extreme droughts, and that's where 70% of their fundamental crops come from. Now, as you can see, most of the people that make up the northern region of Nigeria are the Hausa Fulani, and many of those people belong to the Muslim faith, as well as many of them belong to the herder occupation. Likewise, in the south, or I shouldn't say likewise, but contrastly in the south, it is made up of Christian farmers and of the Yoruba and the Igbo people, and they are experiencing extreme flooding. So, of course, they want to move up north for the better sustainable resources up there. And likewise, the people up north want to move south for better resources and crops down there, crop growth down there. But these people, they can't migrate easily because of their ethnic and religious differences. And that's what's making everything even worse. And this is creating violence. Competition over land, religion, and all these other resources are creating extreme violence over land. And the violence is usually between the Muslim herders and the Christian farmers. In 2018, more than 2,000 people were killed in herder and farmer conflicts over land and natural resources. So, because thousands of people are seemingly getting killed in Nigeria every month over these land conflicts, you would think that the Nigerian government would get involved to create some kind of solution to help this, to bring them together. But instead, they really don't investigate or prosecute any of the people that are responsible for some of these killings and some of these crimes. And this is because the Nigerian government is using political manipulation to control these conflicts. For example, Muslim regions draft legislation that discriminate against Christian regions, and Christian regions discriminate against those in Muslim regions. In 2017, the Benue state enacted an anti-grazing law that prohibited herders from letting their livestock go around unrestrained. After this anti-grazing legislation went into effect, 300 people had been killed in retaliation from herders. And not only this, but extremist groups started popping up. More and more extremist groups began popping up. So this shows that Nigeria's government response is very manipulative. They're using religion as sort of political pawns in this. So they aren't even helping the climate change situation. They are further fueling the fire, further fueling the violence within Nigeria. So I say all of this to say that one of the big themes we discussed in class was whether colonization was beneficial to some developing countries or not. Like many other countries, its impact on Nigeria is positive and negative. A federalist system was able to establish an economy and governance, but although the British took part in some of Nigeria's development, they also took part in their demise. British colonization influenced today's ethnic and religious conflict between Nigeria's northern and southern region, Christian and Muslims. And now we can even still see, centuries later, the Nigerian government is still partaking in the same political manipulation, and their refusal to reduce identity politics is causing this continued deterioration of their environment, their economy, their civilian health, and their development. And without any recognition or any genuine solution, climate change will continue to worsen in Nigeria. And really, it just takes the Nigerian government acknowledging the ethnic disputes and encouraging the two to get along. But because both sides are run by heavily religious leaders, it's hard to ever come to a consensus. But if there's never a consensus, it seems as though Nigeria's climate change issue will continue to worsen.